The first knock came just after midnight. 3 slow, heavy taps that didn't match the rhythm of any neighbor or delivery I'd ever known. I was awake, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling the way I always did in December. Sleep never came easy this time of year. Not since last Christmas. Have I felt safe? Not since the last time he appeared. The knock wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was patient, like whoever stood at the door already knew I was listening, knew I was awake, and simply wanted to remind me that they hadn't forgotten me. I forced myself to breathe evenly, counting the seconds between each inhale, pretending the sound hadn't sent a tremor up my spine. I didn't move at first. Habit had taught me that reacting quickly was the worst thing you could do when something wanted your attention. Terror fed on attention. And the thing that used to visit me every December thrived on it. Another 3 knocks followed, softer this time, almost thoughtful. That was when my pulse began to race. No one should have been outside. A winter storm had been building all evening, the kind that swallowed the roads with ice, and turned the night into a pale, frozen blur. Even from my bedroom window I could see snow, drifting sideways under the porch light. Anyone standing out there would be freezing by now. Anyone human, at least. I sat up slowly, carefully. December had taught me to move like prey, not a startled animal. When I slipped out of bed, my feet touched cold floorboards that felt too familiar, like stepping back into memories I'd spent years burying. I tried to remind myself that I was older now, stronger, harder to touch. But unease crept through me with each step I took. Toward the hallway, I didn't turn on any lights. Darkness offered cover, and whatever stood on the other side of the door didn't deserve the comfort of my attention. I stopped just before the front entryway, keeping to the shadows. When another knock came, this time only one, long and dragging. I felt my breath catch. It was the same rhythm he used the last time I heard him. The same slow, deliberate cadence of someone who wasn't knocking to be let in, but knocking to say, "I'm still here." I swallowed hard and forced myself closer to the door, staying off the creaky part of the floor. Caution had kept me alive through every December since childhood. I pressed my back against the wall and listened. No footsteps. No breathing. No rustling of clothes or shifting weight. Just the hiss of wind and the memory of those thick, gloved hands tapping on the door years ago. I told myself not to look. I told myself not to give in, not yet. But fear has its own gravity, and curiosity has always been its twin. I leaned just enough to glimpse the edge of the front window, careful to stay hidden in the dark. Outside, the snow churned in the glow of the porch light. Empty. Completely empty. Which was worst, I inched forward and raised 2 fingers to pull back the curtain just a fraction. My hand froze halfway there. Something small, red and neatly folded sat at the foot of the door. A scarf. My stomach dropped. Not the same one. I knew that immediately. The one from my childhood had been thicker, older, with frayed threads like veins. This one was new, bright crimson, tied in a perfect knot like a wrapped gift. But it wasn't the scarf itself that turned my blood cold. It was the way the snow around it remained untouched. No footprints. No drag marks. No sign of how it got there at all. A familiar hum rose in my throat, an instinctive sound I made as a child whenever he appeared. A tiny vibration to keep my mind steady, to drown out the panic clawing at my chest. I let the curtain fall back into place. I didn't need to see more. I already knew what the scarf meant. It meant he had found me. Again, I stepped away from the door, retreating into the safer dimness of the hallway. My body moved on autopilot, honed by years of forced vigilance. Back straight, breath shallow, steps soft. Every part of me was awake now, tuned to the silence like an instrument waiting to shatter. My phone lay on the kitchen counter. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would believe me? The last time I tried explaining what happened, well, that didn't go well. For any of us. Besides, part of me knew that speaking out loud might invite him closer. Words had power in December. They always did. The wind outside groaned, pushing against the house. I closed my eyes, willing the storm to drown out whatever waited beyond the door for a moment. I let myself imagine this was all some cruel prank or a misunderstanding. But then, softly, delicately, the scarf outside shifted. I didn't see it. I didn't have to. I felt it. A subtle wrongness in the air, a tiny tug inside my chest, the same way a child feels when someone whispers their name from behind the Christmas lights. He was close. My heart hammered. Stepped backward until my shoulder touched the wall, needing something solid to anchor me. The cold plaster grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't 10 years old anymore. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't alone in a dark house waiting to be chosen again. But the truth was harder. Even after all this time, I still wasn't free. A faint sound drifted through the doorframe. Not knocking this time. A soft, dragging whisper across the wood, like someone tracing a gloved finger along the grain. My throat tightened. The shape of the movement, slow, deliberate, was unmistakable. He was drawing something on the other side of the door. A symbol, maybe. Or a message meant only for me. I forced myself to breathe, to stay steady. If I reacted, if I panicked, he would sense it. And panic was the one thing that always made him stronger. The whispering movement stopped. A hush fell over the house, thick and pressing. Then, so faint I almost missed it, came a voice. A breath, really. A single word through the crack beneath the door. Ready. My blood ran cold. He hadn't asked that since the winter everything changed. The winter he said he'd return when I was old enough. And now that time had come. The whisper under the door faded, but it didn't leave my mind. It clung there, cold and certain, as if the word ready had been pressed into my skin. I stayed against the wall long after the sound disappeared, counting the seconds to steady myself. Years ago, that single word would have sent me running to my parents' room, crying, begging them to wake up. But I wasn't a child now. Fear didn't control me the same way. I had learned how to breathe through it, how to watch it, without breaking. Silence stretched across the house, settling over me like a thin layer of frost. Waited for another knock or whisper, anything to confirm he was still out there, but nothing came. Only the storm outside, swallowing every trace of movement. I eased away from the wall and moved back into the living room, keeping the lights off. I'd trained myself to navigate darkness as if it belonged to me. Some people dismissed their instincts. They ignored the strange, the quiet, the little things that didn't fit. I didn't have that luxury. My instincts had saved me too many times to question them now. Even as a kid, I saw what others missed. The shadow at the yard's edge. The red scarf breathing in the wind. The way he never stepped forward but somehow slipped closer every year. Back then, adults told me I was imagining things. Dreams, nightmares, tricks of the cold. But they didn't hear the voice that whispered my name from outside my window. They didn't feel the freezing air crawl under the door, searching for me. I tried to explain once. Just once. My father stared at me with a tired expression, trying to soften the disappointment in his eyes. My mother tried to laugh it off, but her voice trembled. After that, I kept everything inside. Silence became a shield. Watching became a habit. I reached the window again and pushed the curtain aside by a sliver. The scarf still sat there untouched. Perfect. Waiting. I focused on the snow, hoping to see footprints appear, even faint ones, but the storm erased everything instantly. A clean slate that hid the truth too well. That was the problem with December. Things moved in ways snow could cover. Footsteps vanished. Trails dissolved. It made him bold. My fingers twitched at my side as another memory surfaced. They kind that always arrived when fear scraped too close. I must have been 11. That year I woke up to the sound of bells outside my window, gentle and wrong. Not cheerful bells, slow ones, like something heavy dragged them along. I peeked through the curtains and saw him standing there again, wrapped in that red scarf that twisted like it was breathing. His head tilted up toward me, though I couldn't see his face. I remember thinking he looked patient, like he had all the time in the world. That night I learned something important. He liked when you watched him. Back that I stepped away from the window now, careful to avoid giving him too much of my fear. He fed on patterns, reactions, the little cracks people tried to hide. I wasn't going to give him anything he could use. The house hummed softly with the storm pressing against it. I let the sound anchor me, steadying my thoughts. Fear could scramble your sense of time, but watching, really watching, made everything sharp again. And I needed that clarity that I made my way to the kitchen, keeping my steps light. My body remembered the drill. Move quietly, avoid sudden breaths, stay alert for shifts in temperature. You learn a lot when something stalks you. Through your childhood, you learn how the air changes before something appears. You learn the weight of silence that isn't natural. You learn how wrong the world feels when a presence stands just beyond your view. Most people brushed off those clues. I collected them. I opened the drawer where I kept a small notebook, one I hadn't touched in years. Its pages were filled with dates, strange events, patterns I tracked when I was too young to understand them. Things my parents ignored, things teachers dismissed, things other kids mocked. But I kept it all. I had to. I flipped to the last entry I ever wrote. Age 13. He said he'll come back when I'm older. He said I'll know when. My throat tightened. Tonight was the first time in years he reached out. And I knew now, I finally knew, that this wasn't a coincidence or a haunting memory. He had been waiting, watching, patient as winter. The storm outside growled, and the lights flickered for a heartbeat. Not enough to go out, just enough to warn me he wasn't gone. He was giving me time. Time to remember how to survive him. Time to see what he brought this year. Time to realize the truth I'd avoided for too long. I had built a life around watching the dark because the dark had watched me first. And tonight it had come to collect. The notebook trembled faintly in my hands as I traced the last sentence I ever wrote as a child. I remembered scribbling those words in a rush, afraid my parents would walk in and take it away. Afraid they'd call it nonsense. Afraid they'd make me forget. But the truth was harder to erase than they realized. It clung to me like frostbite, quiet, creeping, permanent. Looking at the page now in the dim glow of the storm's reflection, old memories stirred, rising with the same cold patience that had always haunted December. When I was 5, Christmas meant lights and music and warmth. But even then, something felt off. I'd wake up at night to soft humming outside my window. Always the same tune, slow and low, like someone trying not to wake the house. I remember pressing my ear to the cold glass, trying to make sense of it. The melody was familiar, but twisted somehow, like a lullaby sung by someone who had never heard the real song. Once I told my mother I heard a person outside singing. She smiled, brushed hair from my eyes, and said, "It's just the wind playing tricks." But the wind didn't know my name. And whoever was humming did. By the time I was 8, the humming turned into whispers. Some nights it said nothing clear. Other nights, my name slipped through the wall as if someone's mouth pressed right against it. "Come. See," it would breathe. "Come outside for a moment." I would pull my blankets over my head and wait out the cold voice. It always left before dawn. But the worst memory, the one I tried the hardest to bury, came when I was 10. That Christmas Eve I couldn't sleep. Something felt different. Heavier. The air had a sharp edge to it, the kind that carried warning instead of winter. I kept glancing at my window, half expecting to see a face pressed against it. The house was Quiet, far too quiet, and my breath felt thick in my throat. Then came the tapping. Point 3 soft. Knocks on the glass. Not the wall, not the floor, right on the window. I froze in bed, clutching my blankets so tightly my knuckles went white. The taps came again, patient as they were tonight. I couldn't move, but I could look. And when I did, I saw him, standing at the edge of the yard, scarf drifting around him like smoke. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. My chest tightened with a fear I'd never felt before. He lifted his hand slowly, deliberately, as if greeting me. That was the first time the cold sank inside me. Not on my skin, inside. Like he'd reached through the glass and gripped something deep in my chest. I ran to my parents' room that night, shaking too hard to speak. My father checked the yard and saw nothing. Dreams, he said, firmly. Too much sugar before bed. But I knew what I'd seen. And the next morning even. Though there were no footprints, no signs, no evidence. There was a single red thread caught under the window frame. I hid it in my pocket for years. When I turned 12, I stopped telling anyone what I heard or saw. I learned how to keep silent, how to watch from behind curtains, how to listen without letting fear show on my face. If he wanted fear, he wouldn't get it that easily. If he wanted a reaction, he'd have to work for it. But even now, decades later, those early warnings echo in my mind. The humming, the whispers, the gloved hand tapping on the glass. I see them all clearly as I stand here holding that old notebook, the storm still pushing against my house. Everything I feared as a child has returned. Everything I learned to senses awake again. And when I look toward the front door, I can almost feel him smiling through the wood, pleased that I remember the beginning. Because whatever he wants now, it didn't start tonight. It started years ago, long before I understood why Christmas always felt wrong. The memories clung to me long after I closed the notebook, as if touching those old pages had opened a door I'd spent years nailing shut. The storm outside pushed harder against the house. But the real pressure pressed from within, a familiar weight, one I used to feel every time December approached. It wasn't only him I feared, not anymore. It was everything that came with him, everything that followed, everything that watched. Because he was never alone, I didn't understand that at first. Back then, I thought the man with the breathing scarf was a single nightmare, a lone figure carved out of winter shadows. But as I grew older, I realized he wasn't the only one who lingered at the edges of my life. There were others. I remembered being 13, walking home from school just before Christmas break. Snow covered the sidewalks, and people hurried past with their shopping bags and bright red scarves, faces tucked into collars. Normal, busy, alive. But something in the crowd moved differently. A tall figure, still as a statue, standing apart from everyone else. Their head turned toward me, though I couldn't see. Their face through the scarf wrapped too tightly around it. It wasn't the man from the yard. It wasn't even the same build. But it watched me with the same patience. When I blinked, it was gone. That was the first time I realized the threat wasn't just one shape. Whatever stalked me had shadows, extensions, reflections, copies wearing festive disguises. And they all felt connected to the same cold, watchful presence that haunted my childhood. Years later, during my first job at a small grocery store, I saw another one. A woman humming a Christmas tune. Too slowly, like each note took effort to push out. She stood in the corner of the frozen aisle, her back to me. The store was empty except for us. When I walked past, pretending to stock shelves, she stopped humming, stopped breathing. She turned her head just an inch, not enough to show her face, but enough to let me know she knew I was there. I left early that day, and didn't return until January. But the worst moment, the one that convinced me these weren't coincidences, happened the year I turned 19. I was at a crowded holiday market with Friends trying to pretend Christmas didn't claw at my nerves. The lights, the music, the laughter, they made my friends happy. But I scanned every booth, every alley, every cluster of strangers. And that's when I saw him. Not the original man. Someone else. A tall man wearing a Santa mask, not the jolly kind, but a blank plastic face with hollow eyes. He stood between two stalls, motionless. Children ran past him, couples brushed by, but he didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even seem to breathe. But I knew he was watching me. Then another figure appeared behind him. A woman in a red coat, holding a wreath. Her face was hidden beneath a thick scarf wrapped too tightly, just like the figure from the grocery store. She stood perfectly still. Too still. My chest tightened with the same cold that crawled through me when I was 10. Tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that the world was full of strange people, strange moments, strange masks. But when the crowd shifted again, both figures had vanished. And the air felt wrong, thin, stretched, humming with something only I could sense. That I learned something important that day. He wasn't the only one who knew where to find me. He wasn't the only one who watched. The shadows he brought with him could take any shape. Man, woman, neighbor, stranger. Festive masks worn to blend in. Silent faces hidden in the busiest places. They didn't move like normal people. They didn't look away when caught staring. They didn't break their stillness unless I blinked or turned. But most of all, they were always near in December. Always. Closer than I wanted to believe. And as I stood in my quiet house now, the scarf still resting outside my door, I realized the truth with a shiver. If he had returned tonight, then the others couldn't be far behind. The storm outside thickened, but the silence inside the house grew sharper, as if every memory I'd stirred awake made more space for something waiting to step in. My gaze drifted again toward the door, not because I wanted to look, but because something in me needed to. I moved slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to alert a lurking animal. Yet even as I approached the window, the same old truth pressed against my ribs. They always knew where I was looking long before I looked. I lifted the curtain a breath's width. The red scarf still lay in the snow, untouched, perfect. But now, around it, the storm wasn't smoothing the ground the way it should. Instead, faint indentations circled it like half-formed footprints, only they weren't shaped like feet. They were narrow, too narrow, as if something sharp dipped into the snow and withdrew before leaving any real mark. Almost like finger impressions trailing in a pattern around the scarf. Anyone else would have blamed the wind. But I knew better. I'd been seeing strange snow patterns my whole life. The first time was at 7, after another sleepless December night. My parents were asleep, but something nudged me awake. The same whispery instinct that always warned me he was near. I crawled from bed and looked out at the yard. The snow was pristine, except for one long, thin line leading straight from my window to the tree line. It wasn't a footprint. It wasn't sled tracks. It was a single, dragging mark like someone had pulled a finger along the surface, stopping exactly below my window. When I showed my father the next morning, he stared at the snow for a long time, brow furrowed. But instead of fear, he muttered something about a falling branch or an animal. Even then, I knew he didn't believe himself. He just needed the world to make sense. I didn't have that comfort. As I grew older, the signs changed. Sometimes the snow outside my window formed perfect circles. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. Other times I found spirals, always twisting clockwise, always appearing after nights when I heard distant humming. But the worst pattern came when I was 15. My family had gone to a cabin for Christmas, hoping a change of scenery would shake off the tension I carried every December. They tried so hard to pretend I was normal. I even tried with them. But on the second morning I found something burned into the snow right outside the cabin door, a shape that looked like a handprint with many fingers, each one long and thin, almost like the tips of icicles. The print was deep pressed, down with intentional weight, and at the center was a small thread of red fabric that it was the first time I realized he didn't just appear. He studied, he learned, he adjusted. And he never stopped. Watching. Now, standing in my own living room with the storm clawing at the walls, I felt that same cold certainty. The faint marks around the scarf weren't random. They were deliberate, testing my attention, checking what I would notice, measuring how much I remembered. He wanted me to see the pattern. Because he knew I would understand it, I stepped back from the window, my heartbeat steady despite the dread twisting through me. Fear didn't make me freeze anymore. It made me think. It made me watch. The snow around the scarf formed a shape I recognized all too well, a half circle facing the door. Not a print. Not a trail. A position. A stanced as if he had been standing there, waiting, not knocking at random, not leaving a message and slipping away, standing there long enough for the snow to mold around his presence, long enough to let the cold settle in the shape of his vigil, long enough to watch me. From the porch before I ever woke. A slow realization crept through me, chilling and certain. He hadn't returned tonight. He'd been here 4 nights, maybe longer. And the patterns in the snow, the ones no one else ever saw, weren't warnings. They were reminders I had never stopped being observed, never stopped being followed, never stopped being chosen. And now that I finally acknowledged the truth, every instinct in me whispered the same thing. He was getting closer, closer than ever. The night I now think of as the beginning didn't feel special at first. It felt like every other December evening. Heavy air, restless sleep, a sense that the dark was thinking about me. I must have been 10. My parents had gone to bed after arguing in hushed voices about money and holiday plans. I lay awake in my room, staring at the faint glow of the plastic stars on my ceiling. They didn't comfort me. They never did. They only gave shape to the darkness, like tiny eyes pretending not to watch. It was late. Too late for cars. Too late for visitors. The house had settled into that deep, strange quiet that always made my skin tight. Remember listening to the heater tick, to the branches scrape along the siding, to the faint hum of power in the walls. Then those sounds fell away. Everything went still all at once, like the world had sucked in a breath and held my chest tightened. I didn't know why, but I knew. Something was about to happen. My hands curled in the blanket. I forced myself to breathe. Slowly. I had already learned that fear liked noise. I panicked. If I stayed quiet, maybe whatever waited on the other side of the silence would think I was asleep. The first knock came a few seconds later. Not at my bedroom door. Not at the window. The front door. 3 dull, heavy thuds. They sounded wrong immediately. Too slow, too deep, like someone knocking with a padded fist. Not eager. Not asking. Announcing. I felt the vibration in my bones even from upstairs. I told myself it had to be a mistake. A neighbor. An emergency. Something human. But no one knocked like that in the middle of a snowstorm. And definitely not on Christmas Eve. I slid out of bed, moving like a piece of shadow. The carpet under my feet was cold, almost damp. Every instinct screamed at me to wake my parents, but something else held me in place. Curiosity. Recognition. A feeling I couldn't name yet. The knocks came again. 3 more. Same slow rhythm. The sound didn't echo like normal knocks. It felt heavy, swallowed, as if the house itself was trying not to let it in. I stepped into the hallway and peered over the landing. The light from the street lamp outside spilled a faint glow across the front entry. The door seemed taller than usual, more solid, like it was bracing itself. I knew I should call out. I knew I should say, "Dad, someone's at the door." But my voice stayed trapped in my throat. A strange, cold thought crept in instead. He doesn't want them. He wants you. I didn't know who he was yet, but some part of me did. The third round of knocking was softer. Not as loud as before. Gentler. Somehow. Like whoever stood there had decided to be patient, I moved down the stairs, one at a time, careful to avoid the creaky step in the middle. My heart pounded, but my mind stayed clear. In that strange, floating way it sometimes did when I was most afraid. I placed a hand on the rail and listened. No footsteps outside. No muffled voice calling for help. Just the stale quiet that follows a sound that doesn't belong. I reached the bottom and stopped several feet from the door. The little window next to it was fogged from the difference in temperature. I knew if I wiped it clean, I'd see whoever or whatever stood there. I also knew without knowing how that once I looked, I could never pretend again. Another sound slipped through the door then, not a knock this time, but a slow drag along the wood. Like fingers trailing down from top to bottom. I flinched. A whisper threaded through the tiny gap at the threshold. Awake. The word was faint, but it carried a strange warmth, like breath held too long. My legs wanted to fold. Instead I forced myself one step closer. Then another. I didn't answer. I didn't dare. But my silence must have been answered enough because the whisper came again, more pleased this time. Good. I wiped a small circle in the fogged glass with the side of my hand. Outside, the porch light buzzed weakly. At first I thought no one was there. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw him. He stood a little beyond the welcome mat, at the edge of the light, wrapped in a dark coat. The red scarf around his neck stirred even though the air looked still. I couldn't see his face. It was turned slightly down like he'd been caught mid-thought. Then slowly his head lifted. He didn't have to step forward. He didn't have to wave. The way he angled his unseen face toward me told me everything. He knew exactly where I was. He knew I'd come to look. For a long moment we just stayed there. Him outside, me inside, the door between us thin as breath. I felt something searching, pressing against the invisible line that separated us. Not a hand. Not a physical push. Something else. Something that brushed against my mind and chest and lungs, testing the strength of the barrier between us. That was the first time I understood what it meant to be chosen. He tilted his head, almost curious. Then, with slow, deliberate care, he moved one gloved hand and pointed. Not at me, not at the door. The ground in front of it. A promise. A place. A marked. I didn't open the door. I never said a word. But that didn't matter. By the time he turned and folded into the night, the pattern was set. That was the night the nightmare really began. And standing in my house now, years later, with a red scarf lying patiently in the snow outside, I understood. He'd been waiting ever since. The storm pressed harder against the house, as if trying to remind me that the past wasn't done with me yet. My breath fogged in front of me as I stepped back from the window, the memory of that night, my first encounter, lingering like frost under my skin. But the truth was, his return didn't end with a single knock or a single winter. It continued. Quietly. Patiently. Predictably. Every year after that night, he came back. Not always with a knock. Not always with a whisper. Sometimes he didn't move at all. Sometimes he only stood at the edge of the yard, wrapped in that red scarf that looked like it was breathing, expanding and contracting with a slow, unnatural rhythm that it took me a long time to notice the pattern. I was a child, then a teenager, then a young adult trying to pretend my fears weren't following me. But he never stopped coming. He visited each Christmas Eve like it was a ritual with rules only he understood. And each year the scarf seemed more alive, like it was waking up a little more each time he appeared. The year after the first knock, I tried to avoid looking out the window entirely. I thought if I kept my eyes shut or pulled the curtains tight, he wouldn't show up. But curiosity dragged me back. I remember standing at the window, shaking so hard I had to grip the sill to steady myself. And there he was. The snow reached up to his shins. The scarf around his neck looked thicker than before, twisting slightly as if a breeze moved through it, though the night was still. His coat was dusted with white, but his body was too straight, too stiff, like a mannequin someone had placed in my yard. First, I thought he hadn't noticed me, but the moment I blinked, he tilted his head in a slow, deliberate angle, the same way he did the night of the first knock. He knew I was watching. My breath caught, but I didn't call for my parents. I didn't scream. Something inside me already knew they wouldn't see him. Something already knew he wasn't there for them. Anyway, year by year, his visits changed in small, chilling ways. Some years he appeared closer to the house. Other years farther away. Some years he arrived early in the evening. Other years just before dawn. But he always came. Silent. Waiting. The third year was the first time he moved. I was 12 and already deeply aware of the strange patterns that followed me every December. When I peeked outside, he stood in the exact same place as before. Until he didn't. Without lifting his feet, without shifting his weight, he slid forward several inches across the snow, leaving no tracks behind him. I stumbled back from the window, falling onto the floor. When I crawled back up, heart pounding, he had returned to stillness, head angled just slightly higher, as if my fear had interested him. But the scarf writhed. Not like fabric in the wind, like something inside it pushed against the cloth, pressing, shifting, stretching the fibers. As if trying to slip out, it moved in long, slow pulses, almost like breathing. And every time it exhaled, a tiny puff of frost curled from the edges. I told no one after that. I never doubted what he was. Not a person. Not a ghost. Something else entirely. Something that wore human shape. Only because it had learned that shape frightened us most. The fourth year I tested him. I stayed awake in the dark, refusing to look out the window no matter how strong the pull of curiosity grew. I kept my eyes closed, ears open, waiting. Around midnight I heard a sound I hadn't heard before. A soft tapping. Not on the door this time, but on the window pane of my room. Slow, methodical. Not a knock. More like a finger testing the glass. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. Tap. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body wanted to run, but instincts told me stillness was safer. I kept my eyes shut, but the tapping continued until my teeth clenched from the tension. Then a whisper, almost inaudible, slipped through the glass. Look. I didn't. I knew if I looked, something inside me would break. But curiosity is hard to smother. It gnaws at the mind, wearing down reason piece by terrifying piece. When the tapping stopped, I waited a full minute before opening my eyes to a narrow slit. The red scarf was pressed against the glass. It wasn't wrapped around the neck. It wasn't attached to anything. It clung to the outside of the window as if it had flattened itself there to breathe against the surface. The sight made my throat go tight. Didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice froze just like my body. The scarf pulsed once against the glass, leaving a faint smear of frost where it touched. Then it slid away. The next morning when I dared to step outside, I found it lying in the snow. A small thread of red fabric. But this one looked different. Almost fleshy. Like it had been alive before freezing. That was the moment I began to understand the truth. The scarf wasn't an accessory. It was part of him. A part that grew each year. A part that remembered me. A part that tested the boundaries between us. As I grew older, the visits stopped scaring me in the same wild, chaotic way they had when I was young. Fear became sharper, not weaker. Like a blade honed on experience. I learned not to react. Not to feed him with panic. I learned to breathe slow, to listen for patterns, to watch from behind the safety of darkness. But even with all my caution, I could never shake the feeling that the scarf was watching me back, learning me piece by piece. And now, as I stared at the scarf lying outside my door once more, bright red against untouched snow, I knew this wasn't just a returned. It was an evolution. He wasn't just visiting anymore, he was moving closer. Closer than he had ever been. Closer than I ever allowed myself to imagine. Because tonight, the scarf wasn't just breathing. It was waiting. The second encounter didn't come the next year. It came 2 years after the scarf pressed itself against my window. 2 years after I realized the thing haunting me was not simply watching but learning. By then I had grown older, quieter, sharper. I paid attention to small things. The way the air changed before something strange occurred, the way shadows seemed to bend near December, the way silence could thicken until it felt like an inhale. But nothing prepared me for the night the singing began. I was 14. Old enough to understand that adults didn't believe what children saw, but young enough to still hope that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would pass without him returning. I'd convinced myself the breathing scarf was the last of it, a final warning or failed attempt to get closer. I told myself he would lose interest if I ignored him long enough. For a little while I believed that lie. Then, a week before Christmas Eve, I woke in the middle of the night to a sound so strange it didn't register as danger at first. A voice. Soft. Female. Humming a slow, familiar melody. Not joyful. Too flat for that. Not sad, too hollow. Just empty. Worn down and tired, like someone singing only because they had nothing left inside them but the habit of it drifted through my window like FOG. First I thought it was neighbors. Maybe someone is drunk or restless. But the sound grew clearer with each passing second. The notes pressed against the walls, curling around the corners of my room. I felt the hairs rise on my arms as the voice shifted from humming to singing actual words. Sleep, child, the night is deep. Cold hands reach where secrets keep. My blood froze. That was an old carol, one my grandmother used to sing, one she said was older than our family. I hadn't heard it in years. And the voice singing it was too young to be hers, too crisp to be carried by the wind. I slid out of bed and crept toward the window, careful not to let the floorboards creak. My heart thudded softly, but not wildly. I was used to fear by then. Fear didn't control me. It sharpened me. The singing grew louder as I approached the window. Not closer, just clearer, as if whoever was singing was standing still, waiting for me to come to them. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and looked out. Nothing. The yard was empty. The street was empty. Even the snow seemed untouched, like no one had walked through it in days. But the voice continued, floating from nowhere and everywhere at once. I whispered, barely breathing, "Where are you?" The singing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, like someone pressing both hands over my ears. For a moment I thought I had imagined everything. Then the voice returned, but right next to me, as if the singer now stood beneath my window. "Follow the song if you can hear. He only comes when children fear." I jerked back from the glass. My breath fogged the air. My heartbeat quickened, not with panic, but with the chilling knowledge that whatever this was, it wasn't random. It was connected to him. Before I could make sense of anything, the singing shifted. The voice trembled, breaking like someone trying not to cry. Then, through the trembling notes, I heard something that made my stomach twist. Name. Not mine. Not anyone I knew. But spoken softly, like a memory. "Lena," the voice cracked. A low, aching sound followed, like someone dragging frozen breath through a hollow chest. Lena, I recognized. That name. She had been the girl who disappeared from our school when I was 8. Everyone Whispered stories. Kidnapping, runaway, family trouble. No one ever found her. My parents told me not to talk about it. But I remembered something strange. She vanished 2 days before Christmas. The song faltered again, and the voice whispered the name once more, softer than before. A plea. A memory. A ghost trying to say its own name before it faded, and my chest tightened. This wasn't a warning, it was a message. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Lena? Is that you?" The wind didn't answer. But the song did. This time the voice didn't sing. It whispered. Broken. Frantic. "He has my name. He wears my voice. Don't look for his face." My blood ran cold. Before I could react, the air around me shifted. The temperature dropped so fast my skin prickled painfully. The voice rose one last time, a scream trapped inside a melody. "Run from the red, run." Her voice cut off mid-note. Not faded. Not drifted. Cut. Like someone placed a hand over her mouth. The silence that followed felt alive. My breathing quickened. I backed away from the window, pulse pounding in my throat. I knew that silence. I knew it from the night the man first pointed at the doorstep. That silence meant he was close. Too close. A faint thump sounded in the yard. Then another. Slow. Heavy. Like footsteps. I forced myself to look through the window. Again, but only through the corner of my eye, refusing to stare directly. I'd learned by then that staring gave him more power. Something stood at the far end of the yard. Tall. Still. Wrapped in a dark coat. The red scarf pulsed around his neck like a heartbeat. The sight didn't frighten me as much as the realization. Lena had sung to warn me. Because she had tried to resist him. Once too. And he had taken her anyway. I stepped back from the window, keeping my breath steady. His head tilted slightly, as if tracking the movement. The scarf twitched in response, tightening around his neck like a hungry thing. A slow whisper escaped him. So low I felt it more. Then heard it. Next. The words slid through the cold like a promise. And even though I stayed still, heart frozen, mind clear, I knew exactly what he meant. I wasn't just being watched anymore. Was being chosen again, this time not as a child, but as someone old enough to understand what he truly wanted. And somewhere in the darkness, Lena's stolen voice trembled like a dying ember. The singing never came back after that night. Not Lena's voice, not the hollow melody, not even the faint hum that used to curl around my window. Everything went silent, as if whatever had stolen her voice had wrung it dry and tossed it aside. But silence didn't mean safety. It meant something worse. He had grown confident enough not to hide behind subtlety anymore. By the time I turned 19, I thought I had learned to read the signs well enough to avoid his tricks. I kept my distance from the windows. I learned to sleep with the door locked. Trained myself not to react when the temperature dropped too suddenly in December. And for a while it worked. Or at least I thought it did. That winter a storm knocked out the power across the entire neighborhood. I had just moved back home for winter break, thinking, maybe, foolishly, that the distance college gave me meant he had finally let me go. I tried to ignore the old dread that crept up my spine the moment snow began to fall heavier than expected. Around 11 that night, the lights flickered once, then died completely. The house fell into a suffocating darkness. My parents were away visiting family, leaving me alone, which I hadn't minded. Until the power went out, I sat still on my childhood bed, forcing myself to breathe slowly. The darkness felt familiar in all the wrong ways, like a cloak I'd been forced to wear before. The air grew colder with each passing second. I stayed quiet, listening. The storm outside groaned. The heater clicked off. Then came the sound I always feared. A faint chime. Soft. Unmistakable. The sound of a bell. Not a jingle. Not cheerful. A slow, dragging metallic Sound like someone pulling a heavy decoration across the floor, downstairs, and my throat tightened. I waited, telling myself it was something in the wind or a loose ornament brushing against the wall. But the bell chimed again, louder this time, followed by a dull thump against the basement door. I didn't move. Not at first. The old rules pulsed inside me. Stay still, stay quiet. Survive. But survival also meant knowing what I was facing. I stood and crept out of my room, letting my eyes adjust to the near-total darkness. My feet made no sound on the carpet. The house felt hollow, like someone had scooped out its warmth and left the shell behind. As I descended the stairs, I noticed something strange. The cold wasn't coming from outside, it was leaking up from the basement. A smell drifted toward me too. Faint, metallic, mixed with something acidic, like rust soaked in old snow, and my hand hovered over the basement doorknob. Before I touched it, another bell chimed from the other side. Slow, deliberate, like someone signaling their presence only after they knew I was listening. I forced myself to turn the knob. The door opened to a wall of freezing air. The basement was pitch black, but that wasn't what made me stop. It was the stillness, the heavy, suffocating kind that meant something was already waiting at the bottom of the stairs. I held my breath and descended step by step, one hand on the railing, the other brushing against the wall for balance. Halfway down I saw it, a shape, sitting in the far corner, darker than the basement around it. Too large to be human, too heavy. My eyes adjusted slowly until the outline made horrible sense. A Santa suit. But not one hanging. Not one draped over a rack. Someone was in it. The hat hung low over the head, shadowing the face. The coat was oversized, the fabric stiff from cold. And the figure sat completely still, hands resting on its knees, as though waiting for a child to come sit in its lap. A soft bell dangled from its gloved right hand. My heart hammered painfully hard. I didn't step closer. I didn't dare. Hello. My voice barely escaped me. I don't know why I spoke. Maybe I wanted to know if it could speak back. Maybe I wanted to hear what kind of voice lived inside that suit. The Santa didn't respond. It didn't move. It simply sat there, heavy and unnatural. Then the bell in its hand swayed softly. Once, twice. No breeze. No movement of the arm. The bell moved on its own. Panic clawed at me, but I didn't run. Running meant noise. Running meant slipping. Running meant he would follow. I edged back toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on the figure. But just as I stepped onto the next stair, something on the floor caught my eye. A photograph. A small, old, wrinkled photograph lying at the base of the steps, and my name was written on the back. In red ink. My stomach dropped. I crouched slowly, still keeping the Santa in my peripheral vision, and picked it up. It was me. Not recent. Not from teenage years. A picture of me as a child, standing outside, bundled in a winter coat, holding my mother's hand. A circle was drawn around my head in that same red ink. It wasn't a picture taken by my family. It was taken from a distance. Hidden. Observed. Marked. My breath came too fast. I stared at the image, a terrible cold creeping through my chest. When I looked up again, the Santa suit had shifted. Just slightly. Its head now tilted toward me. I stumbled backward into the railing, gripping it hard. Enough my knuckles ached. The bell in its hand jingled again, but the movement wasn't playful. It was rhythmic. Slow. Almost like the breathing scarf had taught it how to communicate. I whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, the basement seemed to listen. Then the figure slumped forward, just an inch, enough to let the hat slide back slightly. There was no face. Only a smooth layer of pale skin stretched too tightly, like something unfinished or newly formed. No eyes. No mouth. Nothing that should be able to watch me. But I knew it was watching. I bolted up the stairs, not caring about noise now, slamming the basement door shut behind me. The house shook from the force. I backed away, chest heaving, heart pounding so violently I could taste metal. From behind the door came one last sound. Not a bell. Not a whisper. A soft exhale. Like a breath. Like something inside that suit was waking up. And somehow, through the terror, I knew exactly what the faceless Santa was telling me. He'd been keeping souvenirs. 4 years. And he wasn't done collecting. I didn't go back into the basement after that night. Not for days. Not even when the power finally returned. The memory of that faceless Santa. Its bell swaying on. Its head tilting toward me. That exhale from a mouth it didn't even have lodged in my mind like a splinter that couldn't be pulled out. But the worst part wasn't the Santa. It wasn't even the photograph. It was the feeling that something had shifted inside the house and inside me. For the first time, I felt like he'd stepped past the boundary he'd kept for years and placed something of himself into my life, into my space, quietly, confidently, like marking property. I carried the photograph everywhere for a week, as if keeping it on me made it harder for him to take it back. My parents returned from their trip confused, annoyed, and unwilling to hear why. The basement was now my personal version of hell. They wrote off my fear as stress or seasonal depression or old trauma resurfacing. I let them believe that. The truth wasn't something they could help with. It wasn't something I wanted near them. But the truth didn't leave me alone. Because after that encounter I started noticing patterns I had never seen before, or maybe had never wanted to see. A name in a news article. Another disappearance in a nearby town. Then another. And another. All children. All taken in December. All gone without a trace. My heart began beating in a slow, suffocating rhythm as I saw the dates. 12 years ago. 8 years ago. 5, 3, 2. A sequence of vanishings stretched across counties like a hidden string. And right in the middle of that string was me. Or rather, should have been me. The more I researched, the clearer the pattern became. Every year a child went missing. Sometimes two. Most were never found. A handful were discovered wandering highways or parking lots months later, blank-eyed and silent, unable to speak, unable to explain what they'd seen. Their voices, if they returned at all, were not their own anymore. And in every case, every article, every record, one detail repeated. The disappearances always happened close to Christmas Eve. The children Christmas forgot. That's what one online forum called them. Runaways, kidnappings, tragic accidents. Any explanation except the truth. But I knew. I had always known. Still, knowing was one thing. Proving was another. Understanding was something else entirely. And I didn't understand until the night I saw her. The Christmas market it was. A week before Christmas. The town held its seasonal market. A safe, cheerful place filled with lights, carolers, families clutching cocoa. I went because I needed noise around me. Normal noise. Not whispers. Not bells. Real, human sound. But normalcy didn't follow me anymore. It hadn't for years. He always found a way to twist it. I wandered through rows of vendors selling ornaments and wreaths, trying to focus on the living warmth around me. But something felt off. Not wrong, just shifted. Like the whole world leaned a little too much to the left. Then I saw her. A tea first. I didn't know why she caught my attention. She was dressed normally enough, long coat, gloves, scarf. But she walked too stiffly, her steps too even, her head turning only at sharp angles. She passed the hot chocolate stand without glancing at it. Past the booth with wooden toys. Past the children chasing each other as she moved under the market lights. A familiar pressure settled in my chest. A wrongness that pulled at my ribs like a puppeteer's string. I followed her. Not too closely. Just enough to study her movements. Something scraped against my memory as I watched the way her scarf unraveled slightly with each turn, revealing hints of red fabric underneath. Not woven. Not wool. Strips. Thin strips, trailing behind her like they were hiding inside the coat. She moved past the last row of vendors and stepped into the alley behind the market, a stretch of space lit by a dying bulb. I hesitated before following. I told myself it was stupid, reckless asking for death. But the fear inside me wasn't the sharp kind that froze you. It was the quiet kind that pushed you forward because turning back felt worse. When I entered the alley, she was waiting. Not standing. Not facing me. Just stopped. Frozen mid-step. Her head turned slowly, the way a marionette might twist if a string were pulled too far. That's when I recognized her face. I'd seen it before. 12 years ago on missing posters. Hung around my elementary school. Lena. But older. Alive. Standing. Breathing. And completely hollow. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, staring past me into something I couldn't see. Her hair fell in thick, tangled clumps, but what struck me most was her expression. Blank, stripped, clean of anything human. A whisper slipped from her lips. Run. I stepped forward, stunned. Lena. It's you, are you? Her jaw cracked slightly, like the muscles were stiff from lack of use. When she spoke again, her voice sounded like something had been squeezed through her throat. He's watching. My stomach clenched. I scanned the alley, expecting to see him, the man with the breathing scarf, lurking behind a dumpster, waiting in the dark. But the alley was empty. Only Lena and me. Except the lights overhead flickered, and the shadow behind her. Elongated. Not hers. Not shaped like a person. It stretched across the ground like a smear, bending at strange angles. The air grew thinner, as though something invisible was stepping closer. Lena's head jerked back to me. He saw you follow. Then something yanked her backward. She didn't scream. Didn't fight. Didn't struggle. Her body slid into the stretch of shadow as if pulled by an arm I couldn't see. As she disappeared, pieces of red fabric trailed in. The air, thin strips peeling from her coat like she was unwrapping herself. And then she was gone. The alley snapped back to reality. The flickering lights steadied. The air rushed back into my lungs in a hard gasp. I stumbled back, pulse hammering, mind spinning. I knew I should leave. I knew I should run. But instead, I stared at the patch of ground where she vanished. Something remained there, a scrap of red cloth, torn and frayed. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was warm, and it pulsed. Just once. Like a heartbeat. The search for answers. I couldn't breathe normally for hours after that. I drove home without remembering the drive. I locked the doors, checked the windows, turned on every light, even though I knew lights meant nothing to him. The cloth scrap sat on my table, small and harmless looking. But every time I tried to turn away, the memory of Lena's empty eyes pulled me back. She was alive. She had been walking, breathing, until something pulled her under again. And if she had been claimed, then maybe others had too. I started digging. Newspapers, old records, archived articles, police reports. I searched for the missing children, the ones people stopped talking about after the holidays passed. I found more than I expected. Children who vanished on nights of heavy storms. Children who were last seen near windows. Children who whispered about a man in the yard before disappearing. Children whose parents swore their voices changed in the days leading up to the incident. The deeper I looked, the more one truth became undeniable. None of them ran away. None of them were taken by strangers. They were chosen. By him. And now they were something between lost and alive, caught in that warped space he existed in, moving through the world like dolls he hadn't decided what to do with. Yet, the children and #39's Christmas forgot were still here. Somewhere. And Lena had tried to warn me. Why? Why me? Why had he kept me alive when he'd taken so many others? The answer came slowly, painfully. I remembered something I had always ignored, a detail I had brushed aside because it hurt too much to think about. The night he first appeared in my yard, 2 children in my neighborhood went missing. Twins. Bright. Happy. From a family that had just moved in. And I had been the last person to see them alive. They had waved at me from their yard. I waved back. Their parents told police the kids went outside to play in the snow. But I remembered something different. Something I buried for years. I remembered seeing a tall figure standing behind them as they waved. A dark coat. A breathing scarf. The twins weren't taken. Instead of me. They were taken because of me. He didn't take children at random. He took children connected to the ones he wanted. And he had always wanted me. The warped corridor. After nights of research, fear, and sleeplessness, I knew what I had to do. I had to follow the path the children took. Follow the trail of disappearances. Follow the warped logic of the thing wearing the scarf. The next disappearance closest to me had been at the Christmas market years ago. The one after that was in a town 30 minutes north. I drove there, the scrap of pulsing cloth in my pocket, too warm to ignore. The town was small, old-fashioned, with a single decorated street glowing under dim yellow lights. I walked aimlessly, letting my instincts guide me. The deeper I went, the stronger the cloth pulsed, like a compass reacting to something in the air. Then I saw an alley, almost identical to the one Lena vanished into. Strings of crooked Christmas lights hung above it, flickering in a shuddering rhythm as I stepped closer. The fabric in my pocket throbbed, and the alley stretched. Literally stretched, warping like a corridor pulled too long, too narrow, the walls bending as though they weren't walls anymore. The lights twisted overhead, their bulbs flickering in spasms. I froze. My instincts screamed to run. But the fear in my chest was quieter now, heavier, sharper. This was the place. The place where he took them. The place where he waited. I stepped forward. And the darkness shifted, opening like a mouth. The truth emerges. I knew then, without question, that the encounters were never separate events. The singing, the Santa suit, the scarf, the children, they weren't pieces of a nightmare. They were pieces of him. He had built an entire world behind the world, one shaped like Christmas but twisted into something hungry. A place only the chosen could see. And I was already inside it. I walked deeper into the warped corridor. The lights flickered faster. The walls pulsed with a faint glow. Voices whispered. Children's voices. Dozens. Hundreds. Calling out in broken songs. Calling out names. Calling out for help. Calling for me. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I pushed deeper, my heart steady, my mind sharp. Because for the first time in my life, I understood what he wanted. Not just fear. Not just souls. Not just children. He wanted witnesses. He wanted someone to remember. Someone to understand his world before he claimed them completely. Lena's warning echoed through me. He has my name. He wears my voice. Don't look for his face. I finally understood. Why? His face wasn't his. It was theirs. All of theirs. And if I looked too closely, I might see mine. The warped corridor pulled me forward like a tunnel of stretched night, bending reality into shapes that felt alive. The walls inhaled and exhaled. The Christmas lights overhead flickered in uneven beats, like the pulse of something hidden behind them. And those voices, those hundreds of quiet, broken whispers, followed me deeper with every step. Children calling out for names only they remembered. Children singing half-forgotten holiday songs. Children begging for help they couldn't comprehend anymore. The scrap of red cloth in my pocket pulsed like a second heartbeat, and each throb pulled me farther into the nightmare. I didn't feel like I was moving through a place. I felt like I was being guided, welcomed back into a world built from fear, memory, and winter. And beneath the chorus of lost voices, I heard one deeper tone. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Familiar. His breathing. The collector. The man in the breathing. Scarf. The shadow behind the Christmas children. The faceless puppeteer of carols and basement Santas. The thing that had stalked me from childhood to adulthood with patience and purpose. As I reached the far end of the warped alley, the walls widened, cracking open into a space that didn't belong to any town or map. A courtyard, or the ghost of one, retched itself into existence around me. Snow blanketed everything in a perfect layer, untouched, glowing faintly with an eerie light that had no source. And at the center of the courtyard stood a figure in a long red coat. He wasn't facing me at first. His back was turned, hunched slightly as though studying something on the ground. The coat was torn in places, the fabric thinning to reveal writhing threads beneath, thin twitching strips of red that moved like tendons instead of cloth. The scarf wrapped around his neck pulsed slowly, breathing in time with him. I knew, before he even acknowledged me, that this was the closest I had ever come to him, the closest any of us had ever come to the truth. That I stepped forward, boots crunching lightly in the snow. The sound echoed far too loudly across the space. He stopped breathing. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was hungry. Then his head turned. Not all at once, not like a person, but in slow, unnatural increments, like something remembering how the human body worked. Piece by piece, he rotated until only half his face was visible. Except there was no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched too tight over bone. No eyes. No mouth. No features of any kind. A blank mask only shaped by the idea of a human head. But when I looked at him, a pressure gripped my mind, as if eyes existed beneath the skin, staring into me with unbearable focus, watching every thought, reading every fear, knowing every memory. He spoke without moving any part of his face. A layered whisper, hundreds of voices overlapping into one word: come. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. I forced air into my lungs, my mind racing to stay clear. Panic would only feed him. Fear was his oxygen. I needed to understand him, not run from him. Why me? I asked quietly. My voice didn't tremble. I wouldn't give him that. Why did you follow me all these years? Something beneath his skin rippled, like a smile trying to form beneath the blank surface. Chosen. The word hit me like a cold gust. I never chose you. The voices shifted again, deeper now, some echoing like they came from buried throats. You looked. I felt the memory slam into me. That first night, my 10-year-old self, staring through the foggy window, curiosity dragging me out of bed. The moment I looked directly at him, as if my gaze had marked me as his. So that's all it was? I saw you, so you took interest. My voice was steady, but inside a tremor curled through me. The scarf around his neck tightened, twitching like an eager pet. Saw, heard, remembered. Pieces of his strange rules fell into place. He didn't hunt based on weakness. He hunted based on awareness. Children who could sense him. Children who didn't dismiss the impossible. Children who looked into the dark and recognized something wrong. You take children because they notice you, I whispered. Because they can see the truth. The air around him shivered. Not agitation. Agreement. The red scarf pulsed faster, like it was feeding off the moment. Thin strands peeled away from it, twitching toward me like scenting tendrils. I stepped back. He followed, not with legs, not with steps, but with the entire space shifting around him. One moment he was 20 feet away. The next 10. The next 5. Reality folded to shorten the distance. Closer. They layered voices whispered. Ready. The same word he said under my door. The same word he whispered when I was a child. Only now I understood its true meaning. Ready to be taken. Ready to join the children Christmas forgot. Ready to vanish into the maze he ruled. His winter kingdom of stolen voices and festive nightmares. But something didn't make sense. Lena had warned me. She had been able to speak, briefly. She had pushed through his control long enough to try to save me. Why? The collector seemed too powerful to allow that. Too controlling, so how did she resist? Unless she hadn't resisted alone. I remembered the scrap of red cloth pulsing in my pocket. It wasn't just a piece of him. It was a piece of them. Piece of one of the children he absorbed, pulled apart, remade into something that lingered in the seams of his world. I reached into my pocket and held the cloth in my hand. It pulsed faster, warm against my skin, not feeding off fear but reacting to his presence. I sensed something through it, something like a weak heartbeat or a faint voice trying to rise. Lena. Dozens of children. All inside him or perhaps connected to him, trapped in the threads of that coat. The collector tilted his head sharply at the cloth in my hand. His scarf writhed violently, tightening around his throat with unnatural hunger. Give. No, I whispered. The snow beneath him trembled. Then he lunged. Not with arms, not with legs, not like anything human. His entire form shuddered and stretched toward me, the scarf snapping outward like a dozen red tendrils. The coat opened slightly, revealing the nightmare beneath, rib-like structures glowing faintly, each one pulsing with the same cadence as the scrap in my hand. He wasn't wearing the children. He was made of them. Their memories, their voices, their stolen lives woven into a single entity. I dodged backward, narrowly avoiding the lash of the scarf. The tendrils hit the snow beside me and instantly melted it, revealing dark, frozen ground below. He hissed, if you could call that layered chorus a hiss. Mine. No, I said again louder. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't stupidity. It was clarity. The same clarity that had saved me every December since I was a child. This isn't yours. They aren't yours. He surged again, the entire courtyard shaking as he moved. In that unnatural, jerking slide. But I didn't retreat this time. I reached outward with the scrap, letting its warmth guide me. As soon as the cloth faced him fully, the lights overhead flickered. Wildly. A faint scream echoed, not from me, not from him, but from inside the corridor. A child's scream. Then another. Then another. The scrap pulsed harder, brighter, alive. I felt a force. Behind it, weak yet determined. A push. The children. Not all of them. Not most of them. But one. One voice trying to rise. Lena. Her voice brushed my thoughts, fragile but cleared. Don't let him take you. Don't let him see your fear. He can't hold us all if you break his rhythm. His rhythm. The breathing scarf. The spacing of his steps. The cadence of his knocks. The predictability of his patterns. The collector fortified himself through patterns, steady cycles, that let him anchor himself inside this world. If I disrupted that cycle, I could weaken him, unbalance him, force him to show what lay beneath the mask. He lunged again, repeating the same movement, same timing, same distance. I threw the scrap of cloth at the ground. Directly in front of him, it pulsed once, twice, then burst outward in a wave of heat that cracked the snow and cut through the rhythm of his movement. The collector froze mid-lunge. His form jittered. The scarf writhed violently, choking itself. Voices inside him screamed. Children's voices. Voices begging. Voices breaking. His featureless head turned toward me, the skin rippling, fracturing. Cracks formed across the smooth surface, leaking pale light from within. He was unraveling, falling out of sync. The red coat split at the seams, revealing flashes of faces, blurry, distorted faces, trapped beneath layers of pulsing fabric. Lena's face. The twins. Faces. Hundreds more. All staring at me with hollow desperation. I stepped forward, heart pounding, mind cold and sharp. You took them, I said. All of them. You feed on their fear. You wear them. You hide inside them. But you can't hide from me anymore. His entire form shuddered violently, a convulsion of fabric, bone, and stolen memories. Mine, the layered voices rasped. Not anymore. I reached forward and grabbed the breathing scarf with both hands. It writhed under my grip, alive and furious. The moment my fingers closed around it, heat and cold crashed through my body, each pulse carrying fragments of voices. Pleading, crying, screaming. But I didn't let go. I pulled. And the collector broke. Not loudly. Not violently. But like ice fracturing under a slow, precise pressure. The scarf tore open, releasing a scream that wasn't one voice but hundreds. The red coat shriveled inward, collapsing around an empty center as the fabric lost its strength, its stolen life. The entire figure crumpled, falling into a heap of red cloth and pale bone-like fragments. The courtyard shook once, then went still. The whispers faded. The lights dimmed. The world exhaled. And the collector was gone. I stood in the snow, shaking, every muscle burning. The scraps of cloth around me were lifeless, no longer pulsing, no longer warm. The silence was real again. I bent down and picked up one small piece, the one I'd carried from the market. It was cold now, stiff like any normal fabric. I ran my thumb across it softly. A whisper drifted through me. Not a warning. Not a plea. A simple, exhausted word. Free. I closed my fist around the cloth, breathing slowly as the warped corridor began to fade around me, reality knitting itself back into place. But I didn't celebrate. Didn't smile. Didn't feel victory. Because something told me the nightmare wasn't over. He was gone. But the children weren't whole. And the world he built hadn't vanished. It had only cracked. And cracks have a way of letting things through. When the collector's form collapsed into a heap of bone-white fragments and drained cloth, the world did not snap back to normal. There was no rush of warmth, no triumphant glow, no clean break from the terror I had been drowning in for years. Instead, the courtyard dimmed gradually, like a candle dying too slowly. Leaving behind a thick, lingering cold, I stood alone in the cracked snow, trembling, not from fear, but from a hollow exhaustion that reached to the very center of me. The warped corridor behind me flickered, its edges hazy, collapsing inward like a nightmare that had finally worn itself out. His kingdom was fading. But fading didn't mean gone. The whispers of children faded. With it, some frantic, some distant, some relieved. A few drifted like soft breaths across my thoughts. Thank you. It's over. He can't take us now. But beneath those fading voices I sensed the truth. Their freedom was not complete. They were released from him, but they were not whole. Their voices were fractured. Their memories are torn. Their bodies long gone. I clutched the scrap of cloth in my hand, now cold, stiff, and utterly lifeless. A piece of him made from a piece of them. And now, without his power, the scrap was nothing but dead fabric. The courtyard pulsed. Once, a final echo of the space he had carved into the world, then shattered away like frost. Breaking under a boot, I staggered forward. And suddenly, I was standing in a real alley again. Plain brick. Dim streetlight. Snow falling gently from a normal winter sky. I inhaled a sharp breath. It tasted clean, not warped or tainted by his presence. But the world didn't feel healed. It felt hollow. Like something important had been taken from it. Taken from me. Walking back into life, I walked home in a daze. It felt wrong to see houses lit with normal Christmas lights. To hear cars in the distance. To feel the night air as something ordinary instead of an omen. Everything around me moved with a casual rhythm that didn't belong to me anymore. The streetlights flickered in a way that might have once scared me. Now they just looked tired. When I reached my house, the porch light burned steadily. The door stood locked exactly as I had left it. No footprints disturbed the snow besides my own. And yet, I hesitated before going inside, because stepping back into that house felt like walking into an afterimage of myself. The person who had lived there, the child, the teenager, even the adult who had fled the basement. Santa felt like echoes of someone I couldn't fully recognize anymore. Still, I unlocked the door, stepped across the threshold, and let the quiet settle around me like a heavy blanket. The house looked normal, clean, safe, but I felt watched by the memory of all the winters I had survived. Here I walked slowly through each room, touching objects not to check if they were real, but to remind myself I still was. My fingers brushed the hallway wall, the kitchen counter, the edge of the living room table. When I reached my bedroom, I stopped. My window stared back at me like an open eye. For years I had imagined a figure standing outside it. For years I had felt the cold creep through the glass. For years I had listened to whispers that shouldn't have existed. Tonight there was nothing outside but snowfall and stillness. But the silence didn't comfort me. The silence scared me more. Because after surviving a world where shadows stalked me and singing ghosts warned me and faceless Santas waited in the dark, silence felt like a lie. The weight of what remained sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing. But my thoughts kept circling. I had seen the collector unravel. I had heard the children's voices flicker into memory. I had felt the world he built collapse like a dying heartbeat. But what did that mean for me? He was gone. The being that haunted my childhood was destroyed. But the impact of him remained stitched into my mind like a scar that would never fully fade. Every sound, every shadow, every cold gust felt suspect. Now, not because he was there, but because I no longer trusted the world to stay normal. And there was another thought, quieter but heavier. If he fed on fear, on awareness, on those who could sense him, then there must be other beings like him. Other collectors. Other shadows. Lurking behind the edges of reality. Other winter things waiting for someone to look too long into. The dark. He had been only one. And he had been patient. Powerful. Almost eternal if he existed. Others could too. The idea didn't terrify me as fully as it should have. It just settled inside me like an unwelcome truth. Something that hummed with the same cold logic the collector had once used to pull children into his world. The world didn't feel safe. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel healed. But for the first time, I felt something unexpected. I had faced him. And I was still here. Something left behind around 4 a.m, I walked into the living room and stared at the front door, the same door he once knocked on with that slow, patient rhythm. Half expected to see a red scarf outside again. But the porch was empty. The snow was untouched. Relief washed over me, until I noticed something small at the base of the door. Line. Thin. Barely visible. A straight groove carved into the wood. My stomach dropped. Not from fear of him, but fear of what the mark meant. It was where he had dragged a finger. Years ago. On the night he first whispered through the door. On the night I became chosen. I reached out. Slowly, tracing the line with a trembling finger. The groove was cold. Too cold. Colder than the rest of the house. Not supernatural. Not alive. Just cold. Like the memory of him was frozen. Into the wood. A reminder. A warning. A scar. I pulled my hand back. That's done now. I whispered to the empty house. It's over. The house didn't answer. It didn't have to. Because, even though he was gone, the world he had shown me still existed. The cracks he opened were still there. And something inside me understood that doors closed by force don't stay closed forever, especially doors carved open by fear. The snow outside fell steadily, quiet and soft. The world looked peaceful. But I knew peace now was only a pause before something else. Stepped out of the dark. A new wintered, a new whispered, a new presence searching for someone. Who dared to look? And as I stood there in my quiet house, wrapped in shadows and memory, truth settled into me like ice. I survived him. But nothing stays buried forever. Not monsters. Not memories. Not fear. And the next time something knocks on my door, I may not be able to pretend I don't hear it. For 2 days, life held itself strangely still. I didn't see shadows stretching where they shouldn't, or hear soft knocks drifting through the walls, or feel the cold creeping up behind me the way it did every Christmas of my life. No singing from the yard. No bells in the basement. No flutter of a breathing scarf at the edge of my vision. The world was quiet. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to step into the space the collector left behind. I spent those days wandering through my house in careful loops, touching the outline of my life as if checking whether it still belonged to me. Opened the fridge just to see light spill out. I turned on the faucet just to hear running water. Every normal sound made me flinch and then ache with longing. Because normal didn't feel real anymore. On the third morning, snow fell in soft sheets, settling thickly over the streets. The kind of snow that used to mean warmth and safety and childhood wonder. But now it only reminded me of the footsteps I used to see outside my window. Footsteps no one else could see. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to distract myself with the rhythm of stirring. That was when the doorbell rang. A single chime. Short, flat, ordinary. But my heart froze. Anyway, the collector used to knock, never ring. Still, I hesitated before going to the door. Reminded myself that the world was still real, that deliveries existed, that life continued even when nightmares ended. I forced my breathing to stay steady as I unlocked the door and opened it, and no one was there. Just cold air and a small parcel sitting neatly on the welcome mat. No snow disturbed around it. No footprints. No sign of a delivery truck. A square box, plain brown, tied with a thin red string. I stared at it, unable to move. My instincts clawed at me, not screaming to run but urging me to think, to observe, to understand. Because fear was a luxury. No. Caution was survival. I crouched slowly and picked up the box. It was light, much lighter than any package should be. The red string felt cool beneath my fingers, not warm like the collector's cloth had once felt. But the knot was tied too perfectly, too precise. My breath stilled. I brought it inside, closed the door gently behind me, and set the box on the kitchen table. Snowflakes melted off my coat, dripping onto the floor in small, meaningless puddles. For a long moment, I just looked at the package. Then, with care, I untied the string. The knot loosened on its own, one slow, smooth release, as if whoever tied it had expected me to do this. I lifted the lid. Inside was a scarf, folded neatly. Red. So familiar my stomach twisted. But this scarf wasn't alive. It didn't breathe. It didn't twitch. It looked perfectly normal. Too normal. The note sat beneath it, small, white, slightly crinkled. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, as though written by someone who hadn't held a pen in years. Just 3 words. You freed us. My pulse quickened. The children. Another message followed beneath it, scratched faintly in smaller writing. But something else woke. A crack ran through me, sharp and cold. I lifted the scarf carefully. It didn't pulse. It didn't respond. But as I shook it out, something small slipped from its folds and hit the table with a soft tap. A photograph. Face down. A familiar chill slid through me as I turned it over. It was me, sleeping in my own bed. Taken recently, maybe last night, maybe the night before. My body curled under the same blanket still rumpled upstairs. But what stopped my breath wasn't the picture. It was the faint reflection in the window behind my sleeping form. Not the collector. Not the faceless Santa. Not anything I had seen before. A shape stood outside the glass. Thin. Elongated. Head bowed. Limbs too long to belong to any person. A shadow with no features. No coat. No scarf. Just a silhouette, waiting patiently beside my bed's reflection, as though deciding whether to step. Inside. My mouth went dry. The collector was gone. But the world he'd torn open wasn't. Something else had filled the vacancy he left behind. Something drawn to the same cracks, the same wounds in the world. Something that didn't knock, didn't sing, didn't breathe. A presence that did not imitate humanity like he did. Something simpler, older, hungrier. The note trembled in my hand. The last line, barely visible, scrawled near the bottom. Read it already. Knows your name. A low hum moved through the house then, so light it might have been the heater turning on. Except the heater wasn't on. The hum deepened, resonating softly through the walls, not menacing, not harsh, almost curious, as though something tested the boundaries of my home the way a fingertip tests the edge of a flame. I backed away slowly, the photograph clutched in one hand, the note in the other. My breath came shallow, my heartbeat a tight ache. Inside my ribs. This wasn't him. This wasn't the collector coming back. This was something new. Something answering the absence he left behind. Something taking its first steps through a door. Someone, maybe me, maybe the children, had unknowingly cracked open. My eyes drifted to the front door. A new line, thin and sharp, now scratched into the wood beside the old groove. Fresh. Clean. Icy cold to the touch. A second mark. A second claim. My throat tightened. The snow outside fell heavier now, muting the world, sealing everything in a quiet deeper than silence. The house felt smaller, dimmer, as though the walls leaned inward. Listening, I stared at the new carved line, then at the photograph, then at the empty scarf on the table, and a truth settled into my bones like winter itself. The collector may have been defeated, but the darkness that shaped him wasn't gone. It had simply changed form, changed rules, changed hunger. And now it knows my name. I closed my eyes, a cold breath shuddering out of me. Some gifts you do not open. Some gifts are open to you. And this one, this final, terrible gift, had only one message to offer. The story isn't over.